Imagine you're walking into this massive ancient cathedral.
Okay, picture it.
Right. And you've been taught your whole life to just look up. You admire the intricate stained glass, the towering stone arches, the just undeniable absolute permanence of this grand structure. It feels safe.
Oh, completely safe.
Yeah. It dictates the whole shape of the world you live in.
But
Then somebody walks in, hands you a sledgehammer, and says, look down at the foundation. It isn't made of divine bedrock. It's built on a swamp of human prejudices.
I love that visual. Because that sledgehammer, that is Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil.
Yeah.
And specifically today, we are looking at Walter Kaufmann's translation, which really captures the sheer, just destructive force of the original German. I mean, this is a text that completely shatters the assumption that truth is this fixed, objective architecture we just happen to inhabit. It forces you to question the very ground you're standing on.
And we are going to trace that whole demolition today. We're taking you on a journey from the comforting illusions of historical dogma right through the mechanics of our modern social echo chambers and straight into the, frankly, rather terrifying responsibility of the empowered individual, the person who has to build a life on the rubble.
And that demolition begins immediately, like right in the preface.
He's got out of the gate.
Exactly. Nietzsche uses this very deliberate provocation to shake the reader up. He says, supposing truth is a woman, perhaps all philosophers, insofar as they were dogmatists, have been very inexpert about women.
Which is such a wild way to start a philosophical text. He's basically calling out the clumsy, gruesome seriousness of the traditional philosophical approach.
He really is.
Like, you can't win a heart with absolute, rigid, unyielding demands, and you certainly can't capture the fluidity of truth that way. The dogmatists, they've been approaching the world with the grace of a bulldozer.
Right. He's totally reframing the entire history of Western thought. Because for centuries, philosophy sold itself as this noble, objective quest for absolute facts. But Nietzsche argues it's actually just a series of masks.
Masks. Okay, give me an example.
We'll take Plato, for instance. Nietzsche points to Plato's invention of the pure spirit and the good as such, and he calls this a catastrophic, even dangerous error.
Dangerous? How so?
Because by inventing this absolute objective realm of perfect forms, Plato basically denied perspective. And perspective, as Nietzsche argues, is the fundamental condition of all life. You can't just pretend there's a view from nowhere.
Ah, I see. So he's saying these old philosophers were just pretending to be objective.
Exactly. And the Enlightenment thinkers, they get completely eviscerated next.
Oh, yeah. He really goes after them.
He looks at Immanuel Kant, right, and calls out his Tartuffery.
Wait, Tartuffe, like the hypocrite from the play.
Yeah, exactly. That stiff, decorous hypocrisy Kant uses to lure us into his categorical imperative. And then you have Baruch Spinoza.
Oh, Spinoza structured his philosophy like a geometry textbook, right?
Yes, with all the proofs and axioms. Nietzsche literally calls it mathematical hocus pocus. It's this elaborate armor designed to strike terror into anyone who might challenge him. So rather than being these towering systems of pure logic, these frameworks are essentially just intellectual rationalizations for a gut feeling.
Are you saying these grand towering systems of logic are basically just intellectual rationalizations for a feeling? It's like building a massive, intricate military fortress just to protect a childhood security blanket.
That is a perfect analogy. It is a security blanket, but it's one woven with such complex dialectics and mathematical proofs that the philosophers themselves forget they're terrified.
Wow.
And in section 6, Nietzsche explicitly diagnoses this psychological mechanism. He states that every great philosophy so far has not been born from a pure drive to knowledge.
What is it born from, then?
It's the personal confession of its author. He calls it an involuntary and unconscious memoir.
Oh.
Right. An inner drive, a desire of the heart, some physiological demand, or just a deep-seated prejudice. That drive uses the intellect as a tool to defend itself. And then the philosopher just baptizes that prejudice as the truth.
Okay, so it's objective truth. If these towering systems of objective truth are just masks for personal psychological drives, that leaves a massive vacuum.
A huge vacuum, yeah.
I mean, if there is no objective truth handed down from a pure realm, then our entire moral system is completely unmoored. How did an entire species universally agree on what good and evil is without an objective anchor?
Well, the anchor isn't objective reality. The anchor is mere survival. And this brings us to his really famous concept of herd animal morality.
Herd animal morality.
Yeah. For thousands of years, the most cultivated human trait hasn't been intellectual honesty or courage.
Hmm?
It has been obedience.
Just following the crowd.
Exactly. As long as there have been human beings, there have been herds, clans, tribes, states, churches. And within these structures, you always find a massive majority of people obeying a tiny minority of commanders.
And because that obedience has been bred into the species for millennia, it manifests as an innate need, like a formal conscience that just screams, "Thou shalt."
Yes.
And naturally, a herd is going to prioritize specific traits for its own preservation. It values whatever makes a person tame, useful, and safe. Modesty, pity, public spirit, and absolute equality.
Right. And what's fascinating here is the underlying psychological mechanism. It's fear. When a society is fighting for its life against external threats like other tribes or harsh environments, wild animals' certain strong, dangerous drives are prized.
Like an enterprising spirit or foolhardiness, the lust to rule.
Exactly. Those traits protect the tribe when it's in danger.
Mm-hmm.
But once this society feels relatively secure from the outside, that fear turns inward. It becomes the fear of the neighbor.
So suddenly, those exact same strong drives that saved them before are viewed as threats to the internal peace of the herd.
Exactly. The herd neutralizes those internal threats by branding them as immoral, high independent spirituality, or a powerful questioning reason. That becomes a profound danger to social cohesion.
So the herd inherently sides with the lamb.
Yes, and the society becomes, in his view, pathologically soft. It reaches a point where even punishing a criminal feels unfair or terrible to them because the ultimate goal is just the total abolition of danger and tension.
Now, I think it's really important to pause here for a second because the sources we're looking at feature some extremely politically charged critiques from Nietzsche.
Oh, absolutely.
He attacks the democratic movement, socialists, and what he calls anarchist dogs for wanting to level mankind into this mediocre green pasture happiness with equal rights and no suffering. And for everyone listening, we just want to be clear that we are not endorsing or taking sides on these political views. We're just impartially reporting Nietzsche's historical critique of social leveling.
Right, we're looking at his psychological x-ray of society, not adopting a political platform. We're analyzing how the drive for absolute equality is, in his framework, essentially the herd trying to legislate away all suffering and tension.
But, looking at this practically today, so what does this all mean for us now? Because it sounds exactly like modern digital echo chambers.
Well, it really does.
I mean, the algorithms don't just feed us content. They act like Nietzsche's press, right? They're the ultimate automated enforcers of herd morality. They reward absolute conformity and this performative outrage that perfectly aligns with your in-group.
Yep, the engagement metrics just fuel it.
And they ruthlessly punish the exception, the individual who introduces nuance or tension or a dissenting perspective. The algorithm weaponizes the fear of the neighbor on a global scale.
What's fascinating here is how it automates that exact instinct to eliminate danger. The algorithm wants a frictionless user experience, just as the herd wants a frictionless society. It provides the modern equivalent of what Nietzsche called newspaper reading.
Easily digestible, safe, majority opinions.
Exactly. Opinions that relieve the spirit of the tension required for real, independent thought.
Okay, so if the herd's primary goal is to eliminate danger and enforce equality, it sets up an inevitable collision. What happens to the bold individual who refuses to blend in? Does prioritizing the individual perspective challenge or strengthen these moral codes?
Well, they're forced to operate from an entirely different moral origin. And this is the foundation of Section 260, where Nietzsche outlines the two fundamental types of morality: master morality and slave morality.
Okay, break those down for us.
Sure. So while they often overlap within the modern soul, their genesis is entirely distinct. Master morality originates from the ruling group. The noble human creates their own values out of a feeling of fullness and overflowing power.
So they equate good with noble and bad with contemptible. They don't look outward to the crowd for validation, right? They honor themselves. They embrace severity, hardness, and the tension of existence.
Precisely. Now contrast that with the psychological mechanism of slave morality. That originates from the oppressed, the suffering, and those uncertain of themselves.
The people at the bottom.
Right. Because the oppressed lack physical or political power. They have to survive using psychological utility. They take the traits they are forced to exhibit, like submission, the inability to exact revenge, powerlessness, and they rebrand them as intentional virtues.
Oh, wow. So submission becomes obedience.
Yes,
The inability to take revenge becomes forgiveness.
exactly. Cowardice becomes patience. It is a survival tactic to make themselves feel morally superior to their oppressors. So slave morality inherently views the virtues of the powerful with profound suspicion.
Okay, I understand the mechanics of how that psychological flip happens out of self-preservation, but wait, I have to push back here.
How for?
Isn't pity and helping the suffering a good thing? I mean, if we prioritize the individual's will to power over the community's safety, doesn't that just lead to cruelty?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that revulsion you're expressing right now is exactly what Nietzsche anticipates. Yes. Because we are entirely conditioned by the framework of slave morality, which prioritizes utility and the alleviation of pain above all else. But he argues that trying to engineer a society without suffering actually diminishes human potential. He writes, "You want, if possible, to abolish suffering. And it really seems that we would rather have it higher and worse than ever."
Higher and worse. That's intense.
It is, because the tension of a soul in distress is what breeds its strength. The discipline of great suffering is what has produced every enhancement of humanity so far.
Okay, I follow the logic that struggle produces greatness, but it still feels like it requires us to view the weak as fundamentally inferior, like
Yeah.
obstacles or raw material. It's hard to shake the feeling that this framework is essentially a philosophical permission slip for tyranny in the name of greatness.
That's a very common reaction.
Yeah.
But he makes a crucial distinction regarding the noble soul that addresses that very point. The noble soul does help the unfortunate.
Oh, they do.
Yes, however, they do not do it from a place of herd-like pity. Pity, to Nietzsche, is a shared, weakening misery. The noble individual helps from an excess of power. It's an urge begotten by overflowing strength.
No, I see.
It's the difference between helping someone because you feel a helpless, equalizing misery with them versus helping someone because your own power is so abundant it just spills over into generosity.
Okay, that makes sense.
But to your point about tyranny, Nietzsche completely rejects universal morality. The idea that what is right for one is fair for another is, to him, deeply detrimental. Forcing the eagle to live by the laws of the sheep is the real tyranny against human potential.
Right. So if we discard the safety of herd morality and we recognize that the objective truths of the past were just dogmatic illusions masking personal prejudice, we're kind of left standing in the rubble.
Yeah, the cathedral floor is completely gone.
Exactly. So where does the individual go from here? How does this empowered individual actually define truth in the future?
They become what Nietzsche anticipates as the philosophers of the future. He calls them the attempters, or Versucher in German, which carries this connotation of experimenters or even tempters. They are the philosophers of the dangerous, maybe,
The dangers, maybe I like that.
and they recognize a radical, deeply unsettling concept that untruth, deception, and false judgments are actually indispensable conditions of life.
Wait. Claiming we actually need false judgments seems completely paradoxical. I mean, the whole point of tearing down the cathedral was to escape the false masks of past dogmatic philosophers. Why do we need new false judgments?
The mechanism here relies on his critique of Kant. Kant famously obsessed over synthetic judgment a priori, these supposedly universal, necessary truths about reality that we can know prior to experience, like the laws of mathematics, or the concept that every event has a cause.
Okay.
Nietzsche says we shouldn't be asking how these judgments are logically possible, but why the belief in them is biologically necessary.
Because we need the fictions of logic just to process a chaotic universe.
Exactly. We cannot live without the fictions of logic. We have to falsify the fluid, chaotic world with rigid numbers, invented categories, and simplified rules just to survive it. Renouncing these false judgments would mean renouncing life itself.
Wow.
Recognizing that our foundational truths are actually just life-preserving untruths places the philosopher entirely beyond good and evil.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. If truth isn't something you dig up like a fossil, it's not a pre-existing fact buried in the dirt waiting to be discovered. It's something you create, like a sculpture.
Yes.
That puts a terrifying amount of responsibility on the individual.
Right? A truly crushing weight.
Yeah.
Because these free spirits do not want their truth to be a truth for every man. They assert, my judgment is my judgment. No one else is easily entitled to it. And this is the sharp distinction Nietzsche draws between mere philosophical laborers and genuine philosophers.
The laborers being thinkers like Kant and Hegel, he essentially consigns these towering historical figures to, like, intellectual clerical work.
Pretty much. He argues that the laborers simply press past values and history into rigid formulas. They categorize and justify what has already happened. Genuine philosophers, however, are commanders and legislators.
They create new value.
Yes, exactly. They say, thus it shall be. Their will to truth is ultimately their will to power. They reach for the future with a creative hand, using the past merely as an instrument or a hammer.
So wielding that hammer, creating values rather than passively inheriting them from an algorithm, a political party, or a social consensus, that requires standing entirely alone.
It requires an independent spirit and a heart turned to bronze. You have to endure the ultimate responsibility for your own values without the comforting security blanket of universal agreement or objective certainty. It is the most demanding vision of human potential imaginable.
We have charted a severe course today. For everyone listening, we started by stripping away the comforting masks of historical dogma, exposing how the objective truth of towering philosophers was often just personal prejudice in disguise. We examined how the herd morality of the past perfectly mirrors the modern digital echo chambers we navigate daily, rewarding conformity and punishing the bold exception. And finally, we confronted the monumental task of becoming a free spirit and a tempter who doesn't discover values but commands them into existence.
It is the absolute transition from being a passive recipient of society's rules to the active architect of your own existence.
But before we part ways, there is one final, haunting concept from Section 229 that casts a long shadow over everything we consider civilized. Nietzsche claims that almost everything we call higher culture is based entirely on the spiritualization of cruelty.
The savage animal inside humanity hasn't been eradicated by civilization. It has merely been turned inward. It has become divine through self-denial, asceticism, and the harsh discipline of the mind.
So as you navigate your week, look at the highest achievements of your society. Look at the figures celebrated on your feeds. Look at your own ambitions, your drive to succeed, your desire to conquer whatever mountain is in front of you. Ask yourself, is there a hidden spiritualized cruelty fueling that ascent? Are you inflicting that cruelty on yourself in the pursuit of greatness?
A question that demands you inspect the foundation one more time.
The next time you find yourself standing in that metaphorical cathedral, admiring the towering arches of what everyone around you calls the truth, look down and keep that sledgehammer handy. Keep questioning the world around you.